Hi, everyone, and welcome to Crucial Conversations on Cognitive Diversity, brought to you by Bridges 2E Media and the 2E Center for Research and Professional Development. My name is Maria Kennedy, and Chris Wiebe and I will be curating your questions so that they can be answered by our host, Scott Barry Kaufman, and his guest, Jessica Lahey. So, before I introduce our host, I'd like to share a few housekeeping tips. We now have two ways that you can communicate. The chat is for you to share your thoughts and comments about what is being discussed. There is also a Q&A tab where you can write your questions for Scott or Jessica. Thank you so much, those of you who've already completed the poll. I'm going to leave it open for a few more seconds, and then I will share the results later on. So some of your questions will be answered in the chat by Chris, and some will be answered directly by Scott or Jessica. So you can write your questions in the Q&A at any time. The sooner you submit them, the more likely we will have time to answer them. So, without further ado, as they say, I'd like to introduce our esteemed host. So let me tell you something about him. So Scott Barry Kaufman is a humanistic psychologist exploring the depths of human potential. Dr. Kaufman received a PhD in cognitive science from Yale University and has taught at Columbia, NYU, the University of Pennsylvania, and elsewhere. He hosts the Psychology Podcast, the #1 psychology podcast in the world, and is author and/or editor of 9 books, including Transcend, the New Science of Self-Actualization, Wired to Create, Unraveling the Mysteries of the Creative Mind with Carolyn Grigori, and Ungifted, Intelligence Redefined. In 2015, Business Insider named him one of 50 groundbreaking scientists who are changing the way we see the world. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce you to our host, Dr. Scott Barry Kaufman.
Thanks, Maria. That was a great intro. I love that intro. It made me feel good about myself.
You're awesome.
Thank you. No, you're awesomer. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thanks for everyone for coming today. It is now my great honor to interview and introduce Jessica Lahey. Jessica Lahey is a teacher, writer, and mom. Over 20 years, she's taught every grade from 6th to 12th in both public and private schools, including 5 years in an inpatient drug and alcohol rehab for adolescents. She writes about education, parenting, and child welfare for the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Atlantic, Vermont Public Radio, and is the author of the New York Times bestselling book, The Gift of Failure: How the Best Parents Learn to Let Go So Their Children Can Succeed. She's a member of the Amazon Studios Thought Leader Board and wrote the educational curriculum for Amazon Kids' The Stinky and Dirty Show. Jessica earned a BA in Comparative Literature from the University of Massachusetts and a JD with a concentration in juvenile and education law from the University of North Carolina School of Law. She lives in Vermont with her husband and 2 sons. And her second book, which we'll be discussing today, is The Addiction Inoculation: Raising Healthy Kids in a Culture of Dependence. It was just released. Hey, Jessica, it's so great to chat with you today.
Hello, hello. And you guys have to start my video. I can't start my own video. It's lovely to see you, Scott.
It's lovely to see your profile picture there.
Now it's lovely to see me. How are you?
Great to see you. Good. I'm good. How are you?
Very well. We're having an unexpected snowstorm here in Vermont, so it's a little weird for me today. But, you know, I'm going to try to hold it together.
Yeah, try to hold it together. Good luck. Good luck. Stay inside and have a fireside chat with SBK.
Okay, that's one of my favorite things to do, so I'll stick with that.
I love it. Well, I want to start off by asking, why do you write the stuff that you do?
I get all these great questions from readers about like, how do you write all these articles? When I was writing for The Atlantic, I was writing about an article a week, and people are like, okay, well, how do you write all these articles that, people seem so interested in? And the honest answer to the question is I write about the stuff that I'm curious about. I think being a teacher is so fantastic for me. When I was teaching full time, I constantly had to stay ahead of, okay, I'm going to be teaching about Robert Frost in like 3 or 4 days. What like possible questions could anyone ask about Robert Frost? And so, Jess, you got to become an expert in Robert Frost over the next 4 days. That sort of craving for just understanding the world around me. And more than anything else, and I think this is something that you're so great at, is figuring out how things are interconnected. Like, before I wrote Gift of Failure, I had an inclination, I had a kind of an understanding about how some of the things we do as parents affect kids' motivation, because there was some research on that out there. But what I didn't fully understand is how it affects their learning. And so 2 years of research and sort of looking at all this stuff and finding all the ways that this research connect together to tell bigger stories. That's sort of the thing that really just drives me. So like with the most recent book, my big question was, when the experts say substance abuse is preventable, what does that word preventable mean? Like what can we control? What can't we control? What does it mean? Do they really mean it's like preventable? Like we can get rid of all substance abuse? What does that word mean? So that's what drives me, is what the heck? Why? What happens if I poke this? And so that's why I write what I write. To poke things.
I love that. I do love that. But nothing is preventable from an ultimate free will perspective. So that's a broader question. We won't get into the philosophy of mind literature right now.
Yeah.
But anyway. So the intersection between parenting and education it's an interesting intersection with a lot written on the topic. Do you read some of this stuff and you shake your head? Like, or bang your head against a wall, like, does it drive you crazy, some of the stuff you see in the popular literature, popular books about this intersection?
If the research and the writing is driven by, I want to learn what's best for kids so kids can learn. I want to learn what's best for kids so kids can thrive. And the real genuine intent is there, then I don't tend to get angry, but I do get really frustrated by the silos and the encampments. I get so frustrated. So for example, I wrote an article once about the effect of about touch. I was curious. I knew what the answer would be when I said, should teachers be able to touch children? And of course, what I'm talking about is put a hand on a shoulder, just sort of, I taught in middle school, and I taught a lot of kids who really would come to me in the morning to get their morning hug and stuff like that. So I just was curious, where are we on that? And what's the research on, social touch and stuff like that? So I was looking for a quote from a teacher. First of all, it was almost impossible to get one, but I finally got one, and I got one from a teacher who is an administrator who is really well known in the world of charter schools and sort of, the high directive, here's how you sit, here's how you show a teacher you're giving attention, and that's kind of stuff. And some people disregarded the whole article, which was about normal social touch, because the source I quoted was a charter figurehead, which has nothing to do, but he is also a teacher. And so that kind of encampment and entrenchment in the whole, like, oh, you're talking to someone who's pro-charter, therefore you must be pro-charter. And I'm going to now disregard anything you have to say about about unions, about public schools, about, all this stuff is it's really weird. And I didn't fully understand it until I started writing. And my sweet spot is not policy. My sweet spot is what works for learning. And yet it's really impossible to once you get someone angry at you for being what they perceive to be in one camp or another, it can be difficult to roll that back. That's when I get angry. When someone has an agenda going in and I'm reading it and I'm saying, I know you say you're looking at evidence, but I can see where this is going and you're cherry picking and this is all about your agenda going in. That's when I get really, really frustrated. But on the other hand, I think I also don't want to stifle this new. There are a lot of teachers writing books now. There's a whole bunch of teachers writing self-published. There are teachers that have whole self-publishing empires. And I think that is fantastic. I think the more voices we can get out there in the education world, the better. But I also think that in a way that's allowed for some questionable sourcing and some more entrenchment, a little more of those camps to build up, because if this is my camp and I write only in this camp, blah, blah, blah. But that I can imagine that happens everywhere. That must happen in psychology. I know it happens in other fields. When I talk to people about who's writing in that field, they talk about the same thing.
I love that. I love the nuance that you bring to the table with this, and that you're evidence-based. And that's the number one thing. That's probably the number one thing I like about your writing, is that it's evidence-based, and you bring into account lots of different perspectives. But
I do have a secret weapon. Well, yeah, I mean, that's a big. I do have a secret weapon too, in that if I'm not entirely sure, like I'll read all of it in order to look at it objectively to see if the studies hold water. But I'm married to a statistician, so if I get in above my pay grade, I can go to him and I can say, oh, and now I have a son who also is into mathematics and economics and statistics. So I have two people now to pick when I want to go in and say, wait a second, this looks a little fishy to me. What's wrong with this? Or is there anything wrong with this? But I think having an open mind going into things is my favorite place to be.
Yeah. Mine as well. That's probably why we're friends. One of the reasons why we're friends. So a little bit about you. Let's add a little personal touch to this, because you were a teacher for 5 years. Is that right?
So I was a teacher for 20 years. So I started teaching. I started teaching when I was pregnant with my now 22-year-old. So, and I started actually at the Duke Talent Identification Program. My first teaching gig was teaching gifted and talented middle schoolers. Oh, it was such an amazing summer. I taught law in a democratic society, and it was incredible. And I'm still in touch with some of my students. I just had dinner with the parents of one of my students last year when I was a year and a half ago when I was in Nashville pre-pandemic. And then I taught high school and thought I would always teach high school until someone asked me to apply to a middle school position. And I said, absolutely not. What? A middle school? Forget it. Those people are crazy. But then she said, just come meet them. And I did. And oh my gosh, I fell so in love with them that not only was I sure I was going to take the job if they offered it, I took my application back from the high school job that I was hoping to use the middle school job as like leverage to somehow really, nail down this this high school job. But so I taught middle school for a long time. And then in 2013, I ended up teaching in the rehab, and I taught there for 5 years.
Okay, that's what I meant. That's what you're talking for 5 years.
Yes, I did.
Gotcha.
I taught them for 5 years. Yeah.
Gotcha. And you have 2 kids?
Mm-hmm. I have a 22-year-old, almost graduated from college, and a 17-year-old who's a junior in high school.
May I ask if either of them are twice exceptional, or even?
I have 2 neurotypical kids. That's where I am.
That's okay.
Yeah. Neurotypical kids. Yeah. Actually, some really interesting things though, like within obviously everything is a spectrum, and within my neurotypical spectrum, the most amazing things have happened. Like I had these kids I had one that I thought was fairly predictable, and he sort of continued on the path sort of that I thought he would be on. And then I had this kid my younger kid who, when he was young, we couldn't play music. Music really irritated him. All music, really, so in the car, things like that, no music. Words were okay, but music was not. And never wanted to take an instrument, it just irritated him for some reason. And then I have no idea what happened, Scott, but when this kid turned into a teenager, he started listening to music, all different genres. Like this kid when you look at his playlists, they're everything. And now he produces digital music, and he gets off on sort of looking at the waveforms and manipulating the waveforms and creating the sounds he wants. And so now the question is, did he really hate music, or did he hate my music, Scott? This is my problem. Boy. Did he just hate Bruce Springsteen? Did he just hate my selections? And once he got old enough, no, I don't know what it is. But if you had asked me when he was younger, what is the one thing your son will never, ever do? I would say have anything to do with music, because he just can't. He can't even listen to it. And now that's pretty much what he spends all of his time doing. And I've never figured that out, but here we are.
I mean, that just shows the power of intrinsic motivation. Like he had to discover something for himself, clearly.
Yeah.
By the way,
when I say he spends all of his time on it, I mean all of his time on it. Speaking of intrinsic motivation, the kid is indefatigable when it comes to this stuff. Yeah.
It's a good word.
Thank you. I do enjoy that word.
Indefatigable.
I'm sorry, you did it. You did it by the way, and then I interrupted your by the way. And
it's quite okay.
Something.
It's quite okay.
I got excited.
I was just going to say, by the way, the Lakers won last night. That's all I was going to say. No, I'm joking.
I don't
care. I know you don't. By the way, I was going to say, by the way,
yes.
I never mentioned to this audience that they're allowed and encouraged even to write in the chat box as we go along.
Oh, yes.
Because no one has written anything. And as far as I'm concerned, I don't even know if anyone else is in the room right now. This is horrible. This is like talking to the void, the darkness. And so please make us feel less lonely and type something, anything, even if it's a hi into the chat box. That would make us feel good. Okay. Amazing. Thank you.
There you go.
We got the personal interaction going.
The virtual
makes
stuff
a difference.
Great. Well, and this virtual stuff is great because I can be speaking anywhere and not have to get on a plane and go do that thing and be away from home. I get to be with my dogs. On the other hand, the other night I gave a talk to around 150 people, and all I could see was myself on the screen. And I'm like,
exactly.
I don't know. There could be no one out there. Even worse, Scott, everyone out there could be laughing at me. They all hate me. They're pointing at their screens and mocking me. I have no way of knowing. It's really weird to be disconnected from the audience.
So weird. I'm really appreciating people who are writing things in the chat window. By the way, you can enter Q&A questions in the Q&A box. But please feel free to do commentary in the chat window. Okay, before we get to your latest book, I'd love to just talk about The Gift of Failure for a second, which was your earlier book, How the Best Parents Learn to Let Go so Their Children can succeed. There's a topic that a recurring theme on these crucial conversations, where I want to make sure that we're not coddling twice exceptional children. This is a real, I have a real bee in my bonnet over this one, because I see a lot of parents way overprotecting their twice exceptional children, and in a way that these kids start to develop narcissism when they get older, thinking that they're so special, not I'm twice exceptional, like I'm even better than everyone. And that's just not healthy. It's not healthy. So what do you think we can do to help these kids have, this healthy sense of, failure is okay, but also the reverse, in a sense, like I'm not so special that, like I'm above failure?
This is one of the hardest questions I get, mainly because, full disclosure, my special needs and what kids need specifically when it's outside of I've mainly taught neurotypical kids. I do have to tell you, Scott, one of my very favorite jobs ever was I was a ski instructor at Loon Mountain in New Hampshire for the disabled ski school, the adaptive ski school for years. And my particular favorite group of kids to teach were kids who, I had a lot of students who had trisomy 21, and something about trisomy 21 takes away fear. A lot of kids don't have a fear response. So I got very, very good at skiing backwards, because I had to ski in front of them so that they would backwards in front of them so they wouldn't shoot out into the woods and just launch themselves off of things. And I would wear this gigantic dinosaur hat that was very colorful so that I could say, follow the dinosaur, follow the dinosaur. And so that's the with the exception of some work I did when I was teaching high school, that's not in my wheelhouse. So I always feel I have to speak from a place from which I am an expert, and I will not overstep that box. So from my perspective, the answer to the question I often get, which is yes, this is all great for neurotypical kids. You're the mother of 2 neurotypical kids. You teach neurotypical kids. What about my special needs kid? And I actually have a channel on YouTube where I answer sort of gift or failure, frequently asked questions. And one of them is, what about my special needs kid? And I think for every kid, what they really need for us is for us to do our very best to step back and have the most objective view of their abilities possible, and then stick our big toe over it. Just slide our big toe over that line. And, the research on neurotypical kids and education is that, if teachers have an expectation that their kids are gifted, the teacher will have higher expectations of them, and the kids will rise to a higher level than the kids when the teacher believes they're average. But on the other hand, I think for everyone, for me, for kids who have special needs, I think it's going to be really important for kids to feel like someone has expectations for them that lead them to have hope. And there's all this great research that I love. I mean, least of which from Shane Lopez, our dearly departed Shane Lopez, and also Valerie Maholmes, who writes about the importance of hope in to raise kids out of poverty. Shane Lopez used to describe hope as the understanding that your world, your life, the world around you, the greater world can be a better place, and that you have the power to make that happen. And so I think that's where a lot of the stuff I write about having to do with self-efficacy, where that comes in. But I think that idea that for all kids, we know that for all kids, when they have one adult who believes in them and supports them no matter what, they're going to be in a better position than they would have been otherwise, especially for kids who have had a high level of adverse childhood experiences, trauma. So I'm going to globalize what I know, and I know that's not always the best thing to do, but I'm going to say that, really just having an expectation that's slightly beyond where a kid would normally draw the line for themselves. And the interesting thing about that is, from toddlers all the way through to adolescence, those moments when kids surprise themselves or surprise the adult around them with what they're capable of doing, those moments really amaze me. I had a dad who sent me a video once of the kids had asked the dad if they could help with the laundry, and the dad was like, well, no, because you're not tall enough to reach into the thing, and it's heavy and it's wet, it's unwieldy. No. And the kid begged and begged and begged. So it was like a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, and the 5-year-old begged and begged and begged. And he said, if we work together, we can do it. And the video it was a top loading washing machine. And the 5-year-old told the 2-year-old in the video, look, I'm going to climb up on this top loading washing machine, and I'm going to lower myself into the washing machine. Don't worry. The dad was right there. If he had fallen in, the dad could have pulled him out. And he literally and then he said to his sister, and if I fall in, you just grab my legs and you pull me out, and I'll hand you the things and you put them in the dryer. And for the next 10 minutes, you watch this 5-year-old basically falling into the washing machine over and over and over again, getting the things out, handing them to his toddler sister, who was mostly pre-verbal, sticking things into the washing machine, and they did the laundry. I mean, they're just, and then that's even before getting into the concept of desirable difficulties and how powerful desirable difficulties are as a learning tool. When you give someone something that's slightly above their ability level, slightly more difficult to parse, slightly harder to translate, you can actually help them encode that information more deeply. Their learning in the short term will be deeper, and their retention over the long term will be more durable. So for so many reasons, my answer is put your toe over the line of where you genuinely expect that their ability level to end, and see what happens. With support, of course, you're there. With support, you are supporting, redirecting. You are autonomy supportive, not directive, not controlling. You are autonomy supportive. How's that, Scott? Okay, good.
Well, that's nice. What if you're not supported though in your environment?
You, the parent, or you, the child?
You, the child. You're not supported, and you still want to have hope in a psychological way. What do you do?
Yeah, so many of my students at the rehab were in that exact situation. So to give you an idea, I asked one of my students once, we were writing essays about the way we see ourselves and the way other people see us. And I was curious to see what the differences would be. And this one student who was just angry a lot, he was so angry. And we really need to talk about trauma-informed teaching, but he was so angry all the time. And he told me he was willing to write the one about how he saw himself, but he was not willing to write the one about how other people saw him. And I sat down with him, and luckily at the rehab, I often had counselors in the room with me, so that if someone started to really, it was hard for them because they had just either detoxed or been taken off of all of the drugs that they had been using to manage their big, scary emotions and numb out. So these kids are really raw. There's a lot of nerve endings just waving in the air and, waiting to get mad at me for asking them to do something they don't want to do. And so I sat down with him and we talked about why he wouldn't write this essay. And he finally started to cry. And he said, because if I were to ask the people around me what they expect of me, they would all just say, I'm going to go to prison like all the other men in my family. So why even bother to write that essay? And that's a kid who has zero sense of self-efficacy. That's a kid who feels like, and I don't think, and this is a kid who came from a home where there was abuse, where he had very little about what he tried to do to change his environment. Nothing changed. He couldn't get out. He was a minor. He couldn't survive on his own. And no matter what he did, the expectations of him that were the same, that his dad, his uncles, all the men in the family are in jail. So why expect anything else of him? And that's a kid who, I don't know how you take a kid like that. You can detox him all you want, but I don't know how you take a kid like that and you keep him healthy and in recovery and sober, because his world was just so painful. And I think that's really what gets to the root of a lot of substance abuse, which is, I am less than, I'm not worthy of love. I am not worthy of walking around in this world and taking up space in this world. So why bother? And that hopelessness is really what keeps a lot of kids using, and what keeps a lot of people using. So, I think that for adults, at least adults can, make flailing attempts at some control, like, moving somewhere else, getting away from the people who've been keeping you down, that kind of stuff. But when you're a kid and you're a captive audience to people who have nothing good, no expectations of you, and you don't have, this is a kid who also had he could not name one adult in his immediate environment at home who was supportive. So this is a kid who does not have that one person. So that's why I'm always begging people to consider that teachers, mentors, coaches, pastors, to just keep their eyes open, because there's a very good possibility that they're in the path of someone who needs that one person. And you could very well be that one person. And that changes the odds for the kids, frankly. Having that one person can make it a lot more likely that someone who grew up in a really bad situation is going to be okay.
Yeah, what a very eye-opening book, because the whole framing of there are things you can do as a parent to even increase the odds that a child will be addicted. That's like, wow, whoa,
Yeah.
But let me ask you a really nerdy question. Like,
please do.
Like, you didn't control for genes. So how do you know that, like, it's not just there's an addiction genes that you give to the child inherits, and it has nothing to do with your actual parenting?
So I did. So one of the reasons I wrote this book, one of the reasons I wrote this book is that I was raised by an alcoholic, and one of my parents was raised by an alcoholic, and so on and so on and so on. So if you look at the research, sort of the best of what we've got, and I'm going to refer to the words of Mark Schuckett at USC, is that genetics are about 50 to 60% of the risk. So from the get-go, my two boys, and of course, there is no one gene you can point to. It's not like we can take CRISPR and say, ooh, boing, there's the genetics for substance abuse. Let's get rid of it. And there's a ton of crossover with personality. So, there are personality types that seem more drawn to drugs and alcohol. There's, and that also has to do with sort of, the fact that during adolescence, for example, baseline levels of dopamine are lower than at any other time during your lifetime. So, for some kids that they respond to that by, seeking out lots of risk and novelty. But so anyway, so there's genetics. That's 50 to 60% of the picture right there. But there's this horrible analogy. Oh, it's so bad, but it's so perfect. I have to keep using it, which is genetics are the bullet in the gun, but trauma is the trigger. So we have genetics, that's 50 to 60% of the picture. Then, of course, we have epigenetics, which is that intersection between environment and genetics. My student, for example, who had abuse in his home as a kid, that very well can cause your genes to express in different ways. That's the epigenetics piece of it. And then after that, we have the trauma. We have adverse childhood experiences. We have academic failure. We have social ostracism. We have children's aggression towards each other. We have, and then there are periods of time that are more risky than others. So transitions are particularly high risk times, especially for adolescents. We have the fact that the adolescent brain is still under construction and will be until they're in their early to mid 20s, and just runs a little bit different and weighs risk benefit analysis a little bit differently. So all of that stuff all taken together, that's at the base for sort of the risk prevention scale. And I sort of in this book picture it like a scale where risk is on one side and prevention is on the other side. And so the heavier your risk side, I'm talking about those old timey like scales of justice scales. So the heavier your risk side, the more prevention you're going to have to heap on the other side. And I really need people to think of risk in terms of information, because there's a lot of risk factors that really piss people off when I talk about them, like divorce and separation, adoption. There are a lot of risk factors for substance abuse that are hard to hear because they're so common, but they are risk factors for substance abuse. And then, of course, you can go read Nadine Burke-Harris's The Deepest Well and find out there's a much longer list that she has compiled based on her experience as a pediatrician with high-risk kids in California.
Wonderful stuff. One other thing in your book you talk about is the importance of family time. And can you tell me about your surprise dinner with Hot Ones?
Yeah. So Partnership to End Addiction, what used to be called CASA, there's a book by Dr. Califano. He wrote about preventing substance abuse. And one of the things he points to, and that Partnership to End Addiction still points to as one of the most important things we can do, is family dinner. And family dinner, as you can imagine, Scott, and this is the other reason I love research so much, is because people throw all these things out, like whether it's, having dinner with your kid every night, or, if your kid's friends do drugs, then your kids are more likely to do drugs. And frankly, that statistic or that pearl felt just really too black and white to me. And it turns out that's a much deeper story. But this family dinner thing, to me, yes, family dinner is a perfect time to sit down, take stock of each other, talk to each other, make sure there's no weird new depression, anxiety, unpredictable happiness, or, mood swings going on. We can see the stuff if we're sitting down and checking in with each other, and dinner is a great time to do that. But I actually see family dinner as emblematic of something bigger, which is time to check in with our kids. And, for a lot of kids, that could be riding in the car during traveling soccer league stuff. And for a lot of kids, that could be, for our family, the sex talks, most of them anyway, happened on a chairlift, because we lived down the street from the Dartmouth Skiway, and my husband spent a lot of time on the chairlift with my sons. And for some people, it's dinner. But time to check in with your family or on a regular basis, on a predictable regular basis, is one of the more important things we can do. And of course, it's not about, as we often, we know when we read this stuff, it's not about the dinner. It's about the talking and the communication. So to that end, I now have a 22-year-old and a 17-year-old, and they don't tell me a lot. and actually this took place a couple of years ago, they just don't tell me a lot. And it's hard to get past the, how was your day? Fine. Now things are starting to get better, but they were in a pretty secretive and keep it close to the chest kind of place. But we love the show Hot Ones. It's on the First We Feast network on YouTube. It's hosted by a guy named Sean Evans, who is a talented interviewer. And his idea was this: take these celebrities who are really good about being defensive about questions, not defensive, but they have walls up. They're really good at not quite answering the question in order to protect privacy or because they're so unused to revealing stuff. And then give them 10 hot wings. Give them hot wings in ascending order from not that spicy all the way up to so spicy that you cry. And ask one question with each wing. And that spice just throws people off. It makes you, it's like, here's the question. Oh, look over here. And, it just kind of gets people, draws their attention away. And people will say stuff they just didn't mean to say because they're so whatever. Yeah. So I secretly reenacted that. I set it up with some wings, real wings and some vegan wings, and bought all the sauces that they use on the show. There's a place where you can do that. And set it up. And my husband and I labored over the 10 questions, and we came up with 10 questions. They're in the book, The Addiction Inoculation. There's a whole chapter that starts with this story. And we spent 3 hours, not just answering the questions, but talking about the answers to the questions. Like, which of your grandparents do you think you resemble most from a personality perspective, and why? So there's the answer. And then there's the, wow, I thought you would have said blah, or here's why I think you would have said blah. And laughing. And by the end, we were drinking vanilla ice cream because they call it the last dab. That last hot sauce is really hot. 2 million Scoville units of hot. It was hot. Wow. And it was really, really fun. That excerpt actually from the book, really highly edited, is actually in the Washington Post right now. If you want to see what that was about, and there are pictures and everything. Yeah,
I saw the pictures. That was a lot of chicken. A lot of chicken.
It was well, it's 10 wings and vegan wings. You can do it with vegan wings too. You can do it with cauliflower. You can do it with a lot of different things. It was good. It was really fun.
It was good. I didn't eat it, but I'm saying it looked good.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway,
it was fun.
So okay, I think it's Q&A time.
Q&A time.
Or else Maria Kennedy is going to get mad at me.
Okay.
So I better. No, I love Maria Kennedy.
There's an SNL skit on everything. Someone said there's an SNL skit on the Hot Ones thing. There's an SNL skit on everything. So funny.
It's true. Okay, so Tova Cooper. This is a bit off topic, but when I heard you worked at an inpatient institution, it made me wonder if you knew of a place my son, who is 2E spectrum and gifted, could go to learn skills like DBT to help him manage extreme anxiety and related behaviors.
I don't. So here's the deal with the inpatient rehab where I taught was strictly substance abuse. And when my job there ended, it ended because they decided to close the adolescent unit and open it for more adults so they could treat more adults. And so with that, we lost the one place where kids in Vermont could go for inpatient treatment, mainly because there's a push now for community-based treatment. However, there is a place in southern Vermont called Brattleboro Retreat, which is for kids with dual diagnosis, which is usually substance abuse and some sort of mental health issue. So Brattleboro Retreat is the one place that I know of that handles anything like that. I would not be speaking with any kind of authority if I were to weigh in on that.
Okay. I would have the same answer if I was answering that question.
And honestly, if I were to answer that question, I would mention places I know of because I've heard people and I know people, and that is not any kind of evaluation that you want because it's not objective.
Love it. I love that. I love that response. Sharon Barkin says, "What are the top 5 books both of you, would recommend every teen?"
Oh my gosh, this is the best question ever. Oh, top 5 questions. Okay, first of all, and I have one of them right here because I gave a presentation last night and someone asked about books for kids. So, number 1, there is a book starting when kids are sort of tween-ish. There is a book by Catherine Newman, who writes for Real Simple, and she has written a bunch of other books, and she is amazing. And this book is called How to Be a Person. And essentially what she was looking for in a book was, those DK books, when my kids were little, they loved them. They have photographs of things in various categories, and they talk about what all the things are. She wanted that, but for like stuff around the house and how to address an envelope and how to clean a toilet. So she made it, how to make a bed, how to manage clean laundry, how to pack for a trip. I mean, come on, how to be a person. So this book I give to kids really between like 6 and 10. I'm a huge fan of this book, and Scott's doing exactly what I want to do, which is get up and go get books that I want kids to read. I'm a huge fan from a substance use. And I also have to say this, I'm a huge fan, not myself, of graphic novels. I actually don't love a lot of graphic novels, but my students, especially my students in the rehab, love graphic novels. And there are a lot of graphic novels that do some pretty amazing stuff. And this one by Jarrett Krozowska, called Hey Kiddo. So Jarrett has done a whole bunch of really cool graphic novels. I love his work. This is his memoir. He was raised by his grandparents because his mom was addicted to heroin and his dad had taken off on them. And so Hey Kiddo, it really is the story. It's mentioned in my book, The Addiction Inoculation, because one of the things I do, I have to get around the fact I used to have to get around the fact at the rehab that sometimes words are really hard for some of these kids. They've been avoiding a lot of emotions they don't want to deal with, and many of them have been told that they're stupid. Many of them have undiagnosed and untreated dyslexia. Many of them have issues that they've just never been helped with. So reading has been something that they've been told they're not good at. So helping some of those kids sort of guide them with graphic novels has been helpful. But also when kids are talking about hard stuff, like substance abuse in their family, words can be difficult. So this one actually tells a lot of those stories, also with pictures, like the moment he had to first tell a friend that his mom was in jail is part of this book. And that's one of my very favorite pages in here. So this is a book that I highly recommend. I'm going to skip ahead to, and Scott's going to love that I'm recommending this one, because right about the time I wrote The Gift of Failure, I heard that another person, how dare she, was writing on the exact same subject. And she wrote a book called How to Raise an Adult. And her name is Julie Lithcott-Hames. And Julie Lithcott-Hames and I share a student. This is how we met. I taught someone who was 15 when I taught her when she was 15 and in high school. And she went on to Stanford and she had Julie as a mentor. And so that's how I met Julie. Julie's new book, which came out the day my book came out, The Addiction Inoculation, hers is called How to Be an Adult, Your Turn. I bought 20 copies of this book because I am giving it to so many young adults. I'm giving this book to both of my kids have a copy. I'm bananas for this book because it is like the Bible of adulting. And as you may have seen before this thing started, it is incredibly inclusive. Julie wrote this book, made a commitment to inclusivity with this book. And she interviews all kinds of young adults from neurotypical, neuroatypical, straight, gay, black, white, it's just all over the board. And I'm just in awe of Julie and the work she does. And if you get a chance, you should also read her book, Real American. I actually hand a lot of kids Peggy Ornstein's Boys and Sex and Girls and Sex. I think it's a really beautiful book. It's really aimed at parents, but I think it's a book that a lot of kids can get a lot out of because And I'm also a big fan of planting books for kids, just sort of leaving them around. For kids who are reluctant readers, I'm a big fan of leaving nonfiction about topics that they're interested in around. So that's actually my last recommendation. So Peggy Ornstein's books, Julie Lithcott-Hames, Your Turn, Jarrett Krozowska's Hey Kiddo, Catherine Newman's How to Be a Person, and then whatever your kid is interested in, basketball, drawing, whatever it is, go find some nonfiction books about that thing and just leave them around. I had a kid once who told me that he didn't read, and because my job as a teacher is to get everyone reading something. And he said he doesn't read. And I said, well, you have to have read books. I mean, ever. And he's like, no, I don't read books. And I said, well, okay, well, let's get off that topic. What are you interested in your life? And he said, nothing. And I said, okay. So what in your life, what brings you any kind of joy? And he said, only one thing, my dog, my pit bull terrier. And I said, okay, challenge accepted. There is a book by Bronwyn Dickey called The Pit Bull, and it is about the history of the pit bull breed. And lo and behold, that non-reader was caught, I think, 2 or 3 nights in a row reading under the covers with the light of a flashlight and light of a headlamp. And he took that book with him when he left the rehab because he wasn't quite done, but he was a good 3/4 of the way through it. So whatever book about something that they're already interested in.
What an answer. Hopefully that was helpful to people.
I hope so.
Josh Asosella Stollerman said, I work in a high school for unique learners who have not been allowed to fail or taught that failing is a springboard to learning and exploration. Any tips for starting this process with students and their parents when they are 13 to 18-ish?
Yeah. So a lot of what's happening there is there's some research by Wendy Grolnick that shows that when kids have really highly directive parents who are so concerned that their kids are going to do something wrong, that they just keep feeding them the instructions over and over and over again, that those kids are a lot less comfortable with frustration. And what happens when you're not comfortable feeling frustrated is you tend to give up on tasks. So in this one experiment she did, when she first did, the experiment with having kids do a task while the parent was present to sort of figure out what kind of parent she was dealing with. And then once they figured that out, they had the parents do something separate from the kids because she wanted to see how the kids of various kinds of parenting types would function with a frustrating task when the parents were not present. And the kids who had the highly directive or controlling parents were highly unlikely to actually complete the task because they got frustrated and gave up. So the way we count, and that's something that I see a lot in my students, especially in my students who are so driven to be perfect all the time, that the idea of being bad at something is so scary to them, so upsetting to them that they often will not even start. And if they do start something, when it gets frustrating, they tend to throw their hands up, go sort of like, do a little learned helplessness thing, go boneless and give up. So I mentioned desirable difficulties before. And the problem with that is that some of the deepest learning happens when the level of difficulty is a little bit higher and kids are having to work a little harder to understand something. So you can right away see that kids who have trouble being frustrated are in a position to learn less, to not be able to learn as much as their counterparts who can be frustrated. So I used to do this little thing, this little example when I was on stage of something I helped a dad with. This girl was freaking out every single night over her homework. She was like 14 at the time, just weeping over homework every single night, anytime things got difficult. And Ben, the dad, would run to her side and essentially would do the problem for her, which is what we came to find out. But what we found is that when he took a few minutes, told few little white lies, like when she would say, Dad, come here, I need you now, I can't do this. And he would say something like, oh, sweetie, I'm just chopping some peppers right now. Just give me a minute. Let me finish this task. Why don't you reread the instructions? Why don't you look at it another way? Why don't you skip that problem and come back to it? And he weaned her off of needing him to be there in that second to fix the problem for her. And as a teacher, I know that half the time when someone raises their hand, they don't need me to fix the problem for them. They need me to stand there while they talk and they figure it out on their own. So it was a real weaning process for her, but I could tell it was happening at home because it was happening at school too. Like her ability to be frustrated got better and better and better until I could see that she would get tempted to shoot her hand up in the air and she would resist it and she would reread the instructions because she realized maybe she hadn't finished reading them, or she would skip a problem and come back to it later and look for clues in those other problems. And that weaning process can take a while, but it really worked well for her, especially as a 14-year-old when he got to a certain point and he explained what he was up to. And we let her in on the secret. And she was then just determined to get even better at it. So it's giving kids more space, acting like your favorite teacher acts instead of acting like a parent. The best teachers I've ever had helped me find the answers myself. They didn't hand me answers. That would make them terrible teachers. But they helped me find the answers myself and had patience with me while I was getting there. And that's what I recommend parents do, is act more like their favorite teachers and less like themselves.
I like that. That's brilliant advice. You mentioned Julie Lythcott-Haims and her new book, How to Be an Adult. Just want to let people know she's actually the next guest of the Crucial Conversations on Cognitive Diversity. So stay tuned. Next month she's going to be here, and also tomorrow's episode of the Psychology Podcast. She's a guest. So
she was on Fresh Air as we taped this. It was or as we're doing this, it was yesterday. So go to Fresh Air. Dave Davies interviewed her yesterday, and I had 2 people email to tell me that they cried when they listened to her. She's just like that. She's so brilliant. And she is such a fierce advocate for young adults, such a fierce advocate for young adults. I'm so in awe of her.
Yeah, we're both big fans of hers. So this is going to be the last question today from Tina Engelberg. I'm very interested. Okay, here we go. I'm very interested in developing. Okay, here we go. I'm very interested in developing self-efficacy in 2E kids. Both of my boys are neurodiverse. My elder son sort of folded in on himself in 6th grade. Now a senior, waitlisted to university and moving into a gap year. How do parents help encourage kids who don't believe in themselves or have created an epic power struggle? I love this question. It's so important.
Such a cool question.
Thanks, Tina.
Thank you so much, Tina. One of the things that is so wonderful, and I'm guessing these are older kids because they're talking about gap years. One of the nice things about older kids is that we have this incredible ability to talk with them, like with really little kids when they haven't had to struggle much and they need someone to guide them every second. You can kind of wean them off of that without having a conversation really about what you're doing. But with older kids, the best possible thing I've found is to model exactly what it is. Number one, modeling is always important. But in this particular concept, in this particular example, modeling exactly what it is you want to see from your kids looks a little like this. Sweetie, you know what? I have to apologize to you. I have been underestimating you. I think I've been not believing in your competence enough and not believing in you enough. And I think I've been putting that on you. And I'm really sorry for that. And I was doing the best I could do based on the evidence I had. But I've learned a little something, which is the more autonomy, which is kind of like independence, the more I let you have control over some things, and the more I expect from you, and the more I expect that if there's a task in front of you that you can just do it, that the more likely you're going to be able to do that thing. And so from here on out, I think what I'm going to do is make my expectations really, really clear for you, and make the consequences of you not reaching those expectations really, really clear. And then I need to give you more control over your life and over your tasks. And if I didn't do that, if I continued to just clean up the messes after you and do your stuff for you and make sure that you didn't feel the consequences, that would make me not a very good parent, because I wouldn't be believing in you. And that's like my main job. And honestly, my main job is to make it so that you don't need me anymore. And right now, I think you need more help than you should at this age. And that's my fault. And I'm really sorry about that. And we're going to move forward from a place of, here are my expectations. Here are the really clear consequences. And since you're old enough, some of these consequences are just going to roll down the pike and end up in your lap no matter what we do. And I can't clear the way for you for that much longer. So I have a very limited period of time to help you meet those expectations of that world out there. And as Julie Lythcott-Haims says, actually, she says, we do so much work preparing the world for our children that we forget to prepare our children for the world. And stepping back a little bit and making sure that that's what we're doing, and apologizing. And so what we're doing right there, what I did just there, is essentially modeling what I want of my own children. I want my own children to say, I've been doing the best I thought I could based on the evidence available to me. And now I just learned something and found out I can do better. Of course, the expectation is now I should try to do better. And that's all I can do. It's the reason that I have different rules around alcohol in my home for my 17-year-old than I did before I learned what I learned for addiction inoculation. You know, I was a little bit permissive with my 22-year-old, and we have a a very clear, consistent message of no, not until it's legal for you, for my 17-year-old. And that means that I'm modeling for them that process of always trying to be better.
Beautiful, beautiful. Jessica, you always inspire me to be a better human. So thank you so much for this chat today.
Our friendship is so important to me. You really help me think about things in a deeper, more complex way. And I love talking to anyone who doesn't just take an assertion on its face value and understands that there's probably a lot more gray area in there. And can we please talk about that?
Likewise.
Yeah.
Likewise. Yeah. And yeah, just to everyone, just to let you know, this was the first one in our season 2 of Crucial Conversations on Cognitive Diversity, but we have many more coming up. So please stay tuned, get on the mailing list. And we just want to thank you so much for coming today. Feel free to type something in the chat box. I suddenly forgot how to speak English. Feel free to type something in the chat. Does that ever happen to you, Jessica? You're like, oh, I can't even talk
all
anymore.
The time.
This is we hope this was valuable to you all, and let's give a real big virtual round of applause to Jessica Lahey for spending the time that she did with us today.
Thank you. And don't forget to tune in for Julie Lithcott-Hames, because you will not be disappointed. Oh my gosh, she's amazing. Yay! The dancing.
And you can follow me on TikTok. You can follow me on TikTok at SB Kaufman on TikTok.
Oh, you're so funny.
I love dancing.
I don't dance, Scott. I don't dance.
It's never too late.
No, it is it's not a desire I have in me. I will never be on one of those So You Think You Can Dance. That should be your next goal, Scott. You should be on So You Think You Can Dance. We'll have this psychologist, Scott Barry Kaufman, on So You Think You Can Dance.
I'd rather be on Dancing with the Stars.
Okay, all right. That's what I meant. That's what I meant. I don't watch them, so I that's what I meant. I was thinking about like the guy who was on Catfish was on Dancing with the Stars. Yeah, that's what you should do. Dancing with the Stars.
Yes. Cool. So maybe we should stop talking.
Yeah,
I wonder.
Sure. I know. All right. I'll talk to you later.
I love you, Jessica.